was going to be a fantastic follow-up to last night's really special lectures by both Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. Thank you both very much for last night.
Thank you for asking us.
It's a real pleasure to have you back in the school and to see your discussion of some of the ideas and theories in their current form and a bit of your biographical tour, which helps explain how some of these ideas have both emerged and are being used. What we thought we would do this morning is a short session that really talks about the work and the application of the ideas in the form of, I believe there are 3 recent projects,
Yes.
which Denise is going to present right now. And she has encouraged me to encourage you all to understand that this is indeed a seminar arrangement. She'll be presenting the work with the hope that we can go around the room and begin a discussion and conversation about some of the things and some of the issues that are raised by the work. So we're going to try and extract questions, comments, discussion, conversation. What you know this work has been so good at doing for so very long, and I know will be easy to do this morning. We have, at the end of the discussion, the work of Bob and Denise, we have selected about 10 or 12 images, however many might have come in overnight. One image from about 10 students across different parts of the school, which we thought we might just throw up on the screen and see if that lets the conversation go forward in different ways. What we've requested the students to do is to provide a single image and to think of 3 sentences which might introduce who you are, what the work might be in the agenda of the unit, and a question or a topic that you think in the context of this audience would make for an interesting discussion this morning. With that, I just want to welcome back Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, and I'm going to turn over, I think, immediately to Denise, who will begin her presentation. Thanks, everybody, for coming in.
Can I use this one?
You can use either one, yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit first. What Brett said is exactly what we want. We want this to be, in the interest of your really understanding what we stand for as opposed to what everyone thinks we stand for, an interactive session where you ask questions and we can respond, and I think that would help too. Before we do that, and before I get into showing how we applied what I talked about last night, I want to talk about sources. I think that would be useful. Much of what we said last night, both Bob's section and mine, can be found in writing. First of all, The Act of Socioplastics is the name of an article in this book. But I've written about that subject in various other places too. In the book called Architecture, Science and Systems, the whole of part 2 is dedicated to that, and you'll find many of the same illustrations as I showed you there. And the whole of part 1 is basically Bob's lecture. Then there's a book called An Architectural Design Profile of about 1990, and that was called Urban Concepts. And again, the first 2 chapters there cover a similar range, but much more from the point of view of teaching and studio and things like that. Our website, which contains descriptions of our firm and our work, also has a bibliography. Now, we've kept this bibliography since Bob and I married and I joined the firm, but the bibliography goes back to the early 60s, and there's the writings of Bob and me and our writings together. But there's also writings about us, so the thing is about this thick. And we often say, if you know of something that we haven't got in there, let us know. And there's also now an archive at Penn, and the archivists at Penn are very open to learning and to also making stuff available to people. They really want to help. They don't want to keep the archive for just scholars, or some archives are very closed. This one's aim is to be as open as it can be, and particularly for young scholars. It doesn't charge a copyright, for example, just so it has a major applicability. I hope that the recordings of this can get into our archive as well as yours. That would be very nice. Now there's human sources. And right in this room are some visitors who came here. Here is Karen Tunison, and she's a professor at Delft. And she knows a whole lot about us. And I think if the questions get off at a tangent. She might be the one who says, yes, but you really should consider such and such. I wanted that kind of interaction as well as the other. And here is Richard Payne, who started knowing us as a student. He lives in London. He has his own practice in London. And he is in many ways our point person. He's the designer of the, not the poster from here, but the poster for the films at the 20th Century Society and the poster for the seminar that's going to happen tonight at University of Westminster. It's called Argy Bargy. That's the name I gave it. Then he put yakety, yakety, yak, blah, blah, blah. I forget what the others are. All in bright, high colors with flowers all over it. It's very much our style. So he's a talented architect, but he's also a poster designer. And so that, by the way, there I will start again with a brief lecture, much briefer. Sorry about the length of the lecture last night, but much briefer, but it'll be on the subject of reconsidering functionalism. Important as functionalism is, the concept needs to be updated in many ways. So it'll start that way, and then it'll go on into the argy-bargy again, which this is. Here's Stephen Song, and he came from New York, and he is a very recently graduated architect, and he wrote that article called Renovating the Decorated Shed. I think it's really called Paradigm Shift, just to sound scholarly. But he's saying, here are ways a younger person would think about those same ideas. I think you might want to try to talk to these three people somewhere along the line, and they can enter into that debate. Then there are people, I think, the people from FAT should excuse me for calling them the Fat Boys. It's irresistible. But anyway, I think they may be here. They will be here tonight, or not here, at University of Westminster. And then I think maybe Jeffrey Shearcroft and Vince Lacovara from Metropolitan University, who are doing a studio called Learning from Milton Keynes. They're very interesting. They've asked extremely interesting questions of us. So those are other personal sources. So I think, is anyone else I should be mentioning? So with that, let me start. Several campuses, from the level of campus planning through to a major project. So here you see the original campus, one block, and look at this topography here. In the future history of the campus, it's very important. The typical grid plan of an American city, the city of Ann Arbor near Detroit, which is a university town, a river running by here, and a steep drop, about 40 feet, right there, a floodplain of the river here. And there is the one block. That block is there, where that tower is. That's the main campus, the diag, the famous diag of the campus goes across there. The town center is here, which is, I think, there. And now it's 3,000 acres, which is about 1,200 hectares of campus, and it goes off into the region, and you can see it. This is the engineering campus here. The architecture school is in there. And then there's about 1.5 miles. Big blue buses go between the two. The medical campus, like a set of refrigerators sitting here, modern refrigerators, on this cliff, on this brow over there. In here is the remains of an old lake. Very important in our plan. Planners talk about spatial planning, by which they mean two-dimensional flat mapping planning. Part of the failure of planning is to understand sections, and that's why so many people died in New Orleans. So it can be lethal not to think in section, and we architects can help teach planners to think in section as we head towards sustainability. But we very much analyze the sections of the campus, and all this geography here has been very important in what we've done. So next slide. So we were the first people to put the campus, and it heads all the way off here, and further even to here, and there's a fen in here that is original landscape and has to be protected. I don't stress the ecological side of the planning in this talk, but we've worked very much with Andrew Pogon, one of the famous ecological landscape planners, to understand the water movement and to plan with it, not against it. This is where that little hill was. There's the river. There's that floodplain. There's the floodplain, the difference of 40 feet, the medical center here. And we mapped all the activities of the campus. The blue is academic buildings. The dark blue on the campus is libraries. In the town is community facilities. Red is commercial. Look how the red comes right into the campus in two places. It's more like a European than an American campus in that sense. But it strides across the whole town and into the region. Here's the athletic campus over here. Just bear in mind this little area here with a little bit of commercial and a lot of other stuff. So we made this map. All of this is residential, and the yellow is suburban type residential and very expensive. The buff color, which you can just see around here, is little houses, mostly rented to students, who you can see live like that there. The buff on the campus is high-rise dormitories. We're trying to understand both patterns together, like two little cells in mitosis. The social planners say, watch out for those natural analogies. A city does not have a heart. But anyway, it is a good analogy for a designer, so long as you don't use it unscientifically. And again, there was that old lake right in there. You can see an area here which is playing fields in the lake. This was a big parking lot in this low area here. And look carefully, and let me see if I can find it. It's not so easy to find here. There is a bridge here, and it's along the rim of the former lake. So it's at the same level. So although it's a bridge and goes over the road, which is a big state highway, it's flat. You don't realize it because you start this level and that level at the same distance, and the road goes under. So we were very aware of that possibility in this area here. The medical center people here were saying to me by email, medical people in the campus community are very emotional ones. I'll take my $1 million research and I'll go to another institution and it's all your fault. So anyway, they were sending me emails, about that many emails, saying, I take my life in my hands when I go across here, because all the big buses from this area come riding through here, and they're trying to get from the sciences here to the sciences here, to research on this side and to the hospital on this side. So that was a big problem. Next. So here we did analysis of the original campus and the fact that it tried to grow out into the town. Now, tax situation in America is crazy, but if they expand into the town here and they are a tax-free institution, the town loses its tax base. So the town is very interested in keeping them very cramped up. So this is the first time we saw this, and this was in the 1960s. They produced their own garden city plan, a la London. This is the North Campus out there, and that's what happened. But look what happened. The North Campus grew to be so big that it overwhelmed the existing campus and the medical campus. So part of what we did was we said, let's think about these 6 campuses and possible relationships. Paul Davidoff taught us to think in alternatives. Here are some regional alternatives. Do you want, this would be the center, so maybe this should become the main campus and this be a little outrigger there. Or maybe this should stay the only center, and these are really small, or maybe you've got 3 centers here. Right now, I believe this is what they have. The main campus, the medical campus, and the other one. Now, here are some of the analyses of the original fen, which must be protected, and areas of different kinds of planting, and places where it's safe to build. And the similar kind of analysis over here shows the floodplain in this area and other places difficult to build, and places over here where you can build here, but you'll have to have basements which can deal with water. Here is the original lake where the water will come tumbling down, and no matter what you do, water will be there, and you have to deal with it in a big way. We had an ecological way of dealing with it, and we had a mechanical engineering way. The campus chose the engineering way, despite what we said. But anyway, so there's a huge a tank right under the project, which we eventually did here. And then all this is analyzed so that the architect who receives this piece to develop will know where to build and where not to build. So that's a very important discipline that goes along with the others related to sustainability. Next. Now, here we began doing what we love to do. I dreamed of being able to do this for years and years, and suddenly with computers we could get color very instantly, and then take that land use plan, that's a blow-up of a piece of it here, and take it apart. Now, regional scientists and economists call that disaggregating. You take the data and you press a button. That's in my imagination. And I often say to the person, can I just do it by pressing a button? They say, not quite, but we can do that one. That won't be too difficult. So one of the ones is, from all the land use patterns that you saw on the other diagram, please abstract for me the sciences. And the sciences in medicine and in the college at large, and also in the private sector. So this blue pattern striding across the region is sciences. And here is that old lake. Here are the academic sciences. Here are the medical sciences. Here is the life problem of crossing that road. And that is a portion of the analysis. You take one variable and you look at it. But quite soon, the next thing you can do is superimpose variables. So here we show, and this is hard to read, but there are stars, circles, and triangles, and they stand for labs, lecture halls, and I think studios, something like that. And now what we're showing is where the major classroom areas are on this. Here in the college, here in the medical center, and up there you can see the same thing in engineering, this very big campus. So you can see why we claim there are already 3 centers on this campus, even although this was meant to be a kind of a wilderness campus with the music school here and arts here. It became very dense itself. So those 3 centers, and we always show, wherever we can, the retail as a kind of calibration of things. There's Main Street. It goes right into the campus. Now, we're one of the few planners that the merchants actually love, because we do that. Merchants are very scared, small-scale businesses. I am very threatening to merchants. I might take away their livelihood. So I'm very aware of that. So very careful to show how these relationships are important, and you can see them here as well. This is what makes for the liveliness on this campus. So we're very interested in that relationship going through there, and in the one that comes up from the campus this way. And you can just underneath this see what they call a diag. You don't see it very well there. The movement system across that campus. Next. Then another thing we do is we take the rosters, the computerized rosters. We take a sample of very often freshmen, and we show their path from where they live to their first class. And this gives us these patterns and these volumes. Now this is the buses coming. They're not pedestrians on that one, but these are pedestrians. There's the diag in that direction, and there. Again, the place where the, let me get it straight. This over here is where the lake is. There's that bridge I showed you. That's a straight bridge going across there. All the people come to class that way. So we're getting an understanding of those regular patterns I talked about yesterday from that diagram, and it's all pedestrian patterns except where the bus drops them off. That big hole in here with the playing field on it is here. And there are level changes here, as I said. It's got a very large power station in it here. And so, and it's full of cars. It was full of cars there, like that. Now we started analyzing other things. these are museums and arts facilities. These are theaters and auditoria. And we began to see a pattern, like that regression pattern I showed you of all those little dots. Well, that reminded me of that, and I drew the same kind of line they drew there. And look what it gave me, that there is an axis from arts uses in the town to arts uses on campus, right through to the medical center, where they pride themselves on having some arts uses here. So I called this the arts axis. But this already was a science axis. These were 3 available sites right here. Here's the diag over here, but there are sciences here too, and sciences here. And here's that big hole with these 3 sites right there. So I said to them, I think you're going to build 4 big new lab buildings on this campus. Before ever I talked to anyone, I said that, and they said, well, why? Because every other campus we've worked on has done that recently, and you're behind the times. And sure enough, the president's major aim was to get some extremely large new life sciences campuses, buildings rather. And there's a whole educational policy that goes along with it. That's very fascinating to be talking. I'm an educator, and they are too, and we kibitz a lot about education and policy. And we're very aware of the fact that interdisciplinary studies now are so important. These come and go on campuses. Sometimes the departments hunker down and they want all their kids around them and don't go anywhere else. Other times they're saying, there's money somewhere else, can we get some of it? I'm sorry, it's venal in that way. That's why the social planners left planning, because Washington stopped paying for them. They then went into health planning, where Washington was paying next. But anyway, so these movements on campus we're well aware of, and we knew that in the life sciences, serendipitous meetings had to be planned for. You had to allow, what am I talking about? Where 2 major streets cross, that's where lots of people pass, that's where you put your store, your meeting place, your coffee shop, your coffee lounge, anything which will allow serendipitous meetings in the disciplines. And that's how knowledge expands. So we were thinking very much that here are the sciences moving this way, here are the arts this way, here is what I call the meeting of minds right here. Here was a major site on the campus side, and here on the medical school side, and here another one over here on the hospital side. So here are 3 important sites you're going to be building on. And in the process, if we can make a bridge the way they made a bridge, we'll solve the medical school's problems, and oh boy, will there be serendipitous meeting along this route. Next. And here you see a fascinating thing. That's the movement I'm talking about, from the sciences to the medical sciences. Here's that, again, the playing fields. This is the site I'm talking about here. Here is Burnham in 1916 saying just the same thing. You guys sure have a big problem of getting between this area and that. He says these are areas with difficult contact between them. In the 1960s, people have produced some sort of organic-looking something which says we need connection here, and just the direction they did too, and just the direction I've shown here. And they just said, we don't know how you're going to do that, but you sure need that. Next. Now, we then head to a Noli plan, where Noli showed the poche of buildings. You can find computer information which gives you what they call dedicated and non-dedicated uses. Non-dedicated mean that anyone on the campus can use those spaces, which are the big public spaces in all these buildings. So we've shown the big public spaces around here. And then we've shown all the pathways in this pinky color. And it gets to be a nervous pattern of kind of macrame. Looks like macrame. Here's that bridge I was telling you about. And these patterns go, there's the diags over here, the sciences here, this was way across here, and the rim of the lake like that. So if you start here and you go right across here, you're at the same level. But there's a drop here of about, I think it's 20 feet between here and there to the bottom of the lake. So again, using that, we now do what transportation planners do. We draw desire lines. Sounds very romantic, but it just says where people need to go, regardless of whether there are roads there or not. And we drew desire lines right across from the sciences to the hospital, from the sciences to the medical school. We missed one that goes right there to medical research, like that. But you see what it gave us? A triangle like that, between that arts axis that we had discovered and the science axis. We said, there's our meeting of minds. And we actually designed our project around the desire lines. The project was a commons building with restaurants and meeting places, a life sciences lab, and a teaching lab over there. And then it goes back that way to the arts next. So here is the actual project, and you see it here. And here are the linkages. You saw my diagram yesterday of linkages. Here are our linkages. Linkages in, I think it's student facilities and centers and commercial facilities, residential, and library, and here's in sciences, I think. So we show all the ways in which you can use this bridge. Now the bridge itself, we were thinking of synapses in a nervous system. Art Chen, who worked with me as my project manager at that stage, had been a medical student, so he could draw these things, getting wider where they needed to for the population there, and then narrowing again to be this bridge, which is like this bridge down here, is a narrow bridge because you don't want to spend too much money on the bridge. And so this comes out to me like a medieval town where it widens for the access and crowd use needs, and then it narrows again when you don't need it to be too wide enough for groups of students to pass each other, and bicycles, and maybe kids in perambulators as well. So that's the urban structure. But underneath here, in the 20 feet or so underground, we have several stories of parking, and we can park 960 cars, which for Detroit is a real achievement. They really need that. It's the only place I know where one person can generate 2 cars. You know, I always used to say there's a final balance, 1 person per car. It's not true. The dean comes in his own car, and then he gets a departmental car, and he drives around in that. He's parking 2 cars. Anyway, so here's our lab buildings, and the way we suggested they build the new labs here, and eventually a new hospital in here. And the movement is between all of these. Next. So now take that same intertwinglement between land use and streets inside. This is a place where you go into this building, you go into that building here, another entrance here. Lots of people will be moving here. All of these are areas where we put just parapets around the lawn. Here we've put a little sort of rostrum here, and there's places for sitting all around here. This goes off to the arts axis and down to the town and the theaters and things. There are theaters around here too. So this is the movement system that way. And the meeting of arts and sciences right here, and the meeting of minds. And here's a coffee shop. But inside the building, here is the main street. Here are the lifts. There are stairs here too. So kind of fairly near where these two meet, we put a coffee lounge here. And there's another one here. This is the ground floor, so it's a big space. But on all the other floors, you can see there's a little coffee room there. There's another one here. And this is meant to be meeting areas in here, places where you can have a little conference and where the postdocs can get together. The principal investigator probably goes to his own office, and his secretary makes coffee there. But so it's a little medieval town right in there with its meeting place. And here's the other meeting place. People sit out over there. And then here's the final meeting place. So these are different in design from the lab benches, which is like a city grid here. This is, some people call it baggy space. We call it mitten space, generic space that can alter in many different ways. I'll be talking about that tonight. Here is much more relaxed, like lounge space with a different view. And it's interesting, they put a blackboard, it's actually a whiteboard in each of these. And I went looking at the whiteboards on every floor of this building, and all the floors where there were labs, it was full of formulae left up from the last discussion. On the ground floor, much cleaner boards. And this one said, this pot of coffee was made at 7:30 a.m. And this is where administration is. So you see this connection. And that's taking the street inside the building and doing land use and transportation planning so as an interior discipline as well as an exterior. And of course we can relate them. We love the fact that this is internal public space. This is internal public space, and so is that. This is private space. It's like a Noli map inside. Next. And here's that meeting of minds. Here are all the places people can sit out. I had great ideas. There's a stairway down from the ground here. Here you can see the driveway under to the parking below. And I said you can bring up Roman centurions from the ground here as a large parade, and you can do Julius Caesar there. And when that becomes a stage, this becomes an amphitheater. But it's got many functions. And here you see people actually using that way. And when it was still in construction and they had fences around all of these buildings, people sent me a message, and they knew to send it to me. You'll see this building was designed during the planning process, before we ever had a contract for architecture. And the other thing is that doing it that way, we saved about a year on the construction. The fact that we know enough about labs to do this kind of planning, most campus planners know zilch about the insides of buildings, and they make dreadful mistakes. But the fact that we have done many lab buildings means that we could get within 10 feet of the dimensions of this building from the start. And so that was very useful to them, and we could move some big utilities which were there because of the power station early in the process and not hold up the building of these labs which were urgent. The existing dental school here. You see this movement. But they sent me a message. They said, the construction fences are still up, but the students have broken them down, and they're using your shortcuts. They got their bicycles going here, whether we want them to or not. To me, that was very sweet music in my ears. Next. And here you see this complex, the science teaching, the coffee shop area here, the lab here, another coffee shop area down here, a cheaper one for staff mainly. And it's interesting, they found uses that we hadn't thought of. They sit there and they wait to see their rides coming by, and when the car is parked here, they go out, because it's very cold in the winter. There are lots of places we've put where you can sit and watch to see someone coming and wait to meet them indoors, not outdoors, for that reason. There goes the bridge here, and you can see it up close there. And the architecture derives from the work of Albert Kahn on the campus. You've heard of him as the teacher of Mies about factories. He's done very beautiful lab buildings on this campus. Just big buildings with wide spaces between columns. You should look at, in this book, an article referred to by Kevin Lynch called Environmental Adaptability, Ways of Making Space Easily Adaptable to Change. And one of the ways is you make wide column spacing so you can get many different kinds of subdivisions inside. So he had that, big windows for lab benches over here. We couldn't afford the scale he had, so we put together several floors to get a larger scale. But it's really learning from his system. And there's many other things I can say we don't have time for. There's an auditorium there, you can see that. This is an atrium, but our kind of atrium. Between the glass here and the glass and the windows behind of the meeting facilities here is only 8 feet. We make an atrium that gets a sense of space from its big window looking out onto this, not by putting so much space in here that the cost of the building skyrockets and the architect wonders why he was fired. Next. And here are different approaches to it. This is sort of a nice lawn before you hit the hard areas inside. There's the bridge, there's that, again, this is the teaching facility building, full of that kind of sitting about and meeting space. You have to do them more indoors than you would do here, but the kind of terrace that you have outside there, which was just a joy to sit in this morning, we have to do that in little spaces attached to stairwells and things like that for students and others to sit around. So you can get a little informal seminar going in many spots in this building. Next. There's the entrances. There's the Albert Kahn building. And there's our trying to get a scale here, although we can allow many places for subdivision. That's the entrance to the teaching facility. Next. So to sum up that way of thinking, activities form patterns within cities and buildings. Land use and transportation planning inside buildings as well as outside. Functionalism in architecture is not dead, but it needs redefining. See, I've taken the notion of functionalism into the campus site itself and into the region. Functional relationships at many different levels should inform the planning. And then another one, context is not a static landscape. You see, we are always taught, there's the landscape, and then you put your building in it. And then that's it. But in fact, the landscape is always changing, and so is the building. And the patterns of their change ought to be thought of. And if you are designing a campus building, it's going to last beyond the educational philosophies of the present. You're going to be building for people who think about education in an entirely different way. How do you do that? And we've done a lot of thinking about how that kind of generic building can be planned for. It's important for classrooms, for hospitals, for office buildings, for all sorts of buildings, to think of ways, like thinking of it almost as rental space, which will be used by different people. And 100 years from now, maybe, the sequence is very high-tech lab, then teaching lab, because the high-tech needs something different, and then I suspect after that, engineering or architecture studio. It's a nice progression in itself. Next. Now, I'm coming to 2 small buildings that we've just completed, and I would maintain that we have used similar way of thinking, but of course it's not the whole of thinking about architecture that I've been showing you. It's an interesting augmentation. It's socioplastics. It brings social life onto the ground, but there's many other dimensions in designing a building, and learning in the studio is often a succession of experiences which helps you successively relate more and more complex dimensions into the process. So whereas we do think that way in these buildings, it's a little chapel here in the school where Bob went in America, Episcopal Academy, which is basically Anglicanism in England and Episcopalianism in America related. And here is a very small synagogue in a very small country town. And we didn't do full working drawings here because they had no money, and there was a big food chain that more or less occupied the town, and they produced their own architects to do the working drawings for the community as a contribution. So our drawings are rather minimal here compared with that, and they had good people, so we could do that. But so this is a little town, mainly of red brick buildings. The little community buildings of different kinds are dotted around here, and this becomes one of them on the street here. And here is on a campus, on the green on the campus, with the main entrances to the chapel here. Next. And the 2 plans. Now, again, we could make a Noli map of this, and within a building, here are the public ways, and here is a public area here. These are private offices at the back, and these are like the blocks in a city. They're the pews. And this is a school where there'll be kids from about 5, and then people about to go to college as well. And 900 seats. This is much smaller. And they really wanted not the soaring of a Gothic church where you see the backs of everyone's heads in front of you, but the feeling that as you sat here and you looked across here, you also saw each other. So they wanted this round plan. They wanted to feel that if 250 people were in here, they felt very good, and if 900 people were in here, they also felt very good. And also entrances into this with airlocks here because it's cold, and into this main way for weddings and processionals, but there's also a side way. You can leave your book bags and coats and things in here and head off this way. Place for small kids around here, kneeling place here, an organ here. And then we are given to doing Las Vegas and science. We do academic work, and we just don't do that because you can't. But particularly here, they said we have all sorts of religions, and we don't want the cross to dominate. And that was very nice of them. Now, I've heard other people say, we want ecumenism, and we want all the symbols. We want a cross, we want a Star of David, we want a crescent, we want it to be Las Vegas of religions in there. But these people didn't want that, so we gave them much more purity, because that's what they wanted. Light coming in from these areas. And there was a time where they wanted a pitched roof here, and they also wanted this round space. And we said, there's many reasons not to do that. And they kept on saying, but we told you from the first, you aren't listening to us. There's many, we told you we wanted that. Well, thank God, finally we found two people who had an experience which told them that if you do this and you put a big sloping space here, you'll get a very, very dark barn inside there. We said, we can give you flat roofs here. They said, flat roofs, we can't do that. Said, it'll have clear story and you'll be able to get light in. Not only that, it'll be cheap and you'll be able to afford it, and it won't be so high that you have to wait 5 years to get zoning permission for the extra height you want. But reason would not prevail, but we found these two people who were more open-minded, and they helped us. Luckily, they were major donors. So that really did help. So it's not the rationality of the idea, it's the power of your client. What am I going to tell you? It's not nice, but it's true. Later, the people who felt that way, they came into it, and one of them, a good friend of ours, who was so mad at us for, quote, not listening, he said to me, it was a failure of my imagination. And I said, it wasn't your imagination. They wouldn't even let us make a drawing of the inside to show you what it would be like. But so thank God we managed to prevail. Here, it was easier. But we have the same thing. There's a public space. You see, it's off the orthogonal, which suggests it's public. And there's the chapel part in here. This building must have transcendence and aspiration, and zoom up, because that's what Christianity is all about in its buildings. This is a meeting place which needs light coming from wonderful places, but it doesn't have to have the same aspiration toward heaven. Judaism says, when 10 men, you should pardon the expression, but that's what the Bible says, when 10 men are gathered in my name, there shall I be. It just happened these people felt something similar. They wanted people to sense each other while they were praying. So in a way it was in common, but it was not because of the religion. Next. It was lovely comparing these two. So here you get this aspiration via clear stories. And then we made a tower, and it has a bell, but it's electronic. And it's a constructivist kind of tower. But here's sort of suggestion of streaky bacon style. And so the essence of Gothic architecture is suggested by one arcade that you actually come in here and here, and by one tower that's not really solid. It's a cheap way. The one thing we want is masonry here, and this is concrete block. Only this is granite. It's a question of what they could afford. And then the sense of mounting there. And they use their chapel very creatively for community work and for many different things. And it's got girls in the school now. It didn't before. They're very aware to keep the ceremony friendly toward other religions and also toward young women as well as young men, and to little children too. Next. Synagogue architecture spends a lot of time trying not to be a church. So the arcade here suggests Byzantine architecture. We had a little trouble because they said it also suggested the entry to Auschwitz. If you've ever seen the picture of the entry to Auschwitz, it has an arch here, and it says something like unity strength, or something like that. So we had to get over that, but we managed to discuss it with him. And here is light, but you see the tower doesn't reinforce the entry because it's not Christian. And this could also be the stripes on a Byzantine, interior. And you can see the red brick buildings here, and apart from this, the rest of this building is red brick, and it's kind of about the size of a small supermarket. Next. And here you can see the mounting, the windows that come here. We had a big problem that they said there wasn't enough light. And Bob said, but that's the purity of this thing, is you can only get light here. And then I finally leaned on Bob and said, you sure as anything can get light here? It's not going to hurt the structure. We can get a whole lot of light in this wall too. And we managed to do that, and they love the light now that comes in. And here's light coming here, and here you can see it's tying in with the other building in size and everything. Next. Next. And here's a section. We managed to keep at the height level of the building there. And here's, you can see it's a much smaller building here, but it's also got light coming in, and there's the arcade there, and there it is there. And the private rooms in here. I think we didn't do this in the end. They couldn't afford it. We managed to keep out of the basement. Next. And here is the chapel. That's the light that I strong-armed into the place. And here you see it. Now, we haven't talked about structure. It was fascinating. We had in mind the rafters in a Gothic church, but the structure needed this given the round quality here. So there are circular beams here, and then these transmit, and they come down around the organ over here. And it's Pyrenean space. It's the nearest thing we've come to doing Pyrenean space, but for very good reason, and in a flat-footed way to keep the prices down. And here is the synagogue with the arch, with the ark over here. You know, synagogue architecture was a tent when Jews were nomads, a tent with an ark. And so here is the ark, which has doors that open, and inside here are the Holy of Holies. Every time that door opens, the congregation stands. And here is the tent over here. But I maintain that maybe church architecture was a tent too, and the Gothic columns were the posts in the tent. The lady chapels were the round end of the tent. So maybe this was a tent too once, when the society was nomadic. And then there's a lot of light coming in here too. Next. There's the cross. It's the only cross. Bob was thinking also of wren churches and the light coming high, and that you should be able to see trees through there. Still working on them to try to find some way to get it that you'll see green leaves eventually one day there. So that's the story, and it's open to questions. As I say, anyone who wants to is very welcome to continue this at University of Westminster on Marylebone Street. It's starting at 6:30 there tonight. Now let's do questions. Bob should. Well, Bob, you could. I want Bob to do a lot of questions because he gave a short presentation with the notion that he would be available for a lot of questions, more than me because you've heard from me a lot.
This is a Denise occasion. I am Mr. Thatcher.
I think one of the things that comes across as you present the work, if I can start a question for us, and I was thinking about it a bit last night as both of you were talking, is your use of the plan. And I think one of the things that stands out in the work isn't just the use of the plan as a way to explain the project, but I'm thinking particularly about the way in which you use it to generate these projects. And I think there are many of us today that would look at the rise of 3D modeling programs, digital software, design software, and say that the plan has been under attack in recent years in various ways because the basic kind of tool or interface is three-dimensional.
But you can
model. Just one.
You can model the plan too. That's what I've been trying to say. All those urban models, all that city physics, is the modeling of the plan. And you know, when we were doing the Toulouse building, which is like a state capital in America, it's a regional administrative government center, and we were presented with a big site, and the architects we were working with started to say, architects don't know what to do with a big site. They treat it like a room. We'll put the armchair here, we'll put the rug here, and so on. So they began to say, there's room for 3 slabs this way, and another slab this way, and another slab this way. And I looked at it and I said, not bad. So when the Sainsbury's said they would pay for the National Gallery. I didn't think that was Shanghaiing things. At Berkeley in the 60s, knowledgeable people said, you have to watch for corruption on both sides. The private sector will try to corrupt the non-governmental sector, and so will government. Both will. And it reminded me when we were in Prague, and I said to the planners for the city, how will you deal with the onslaught of capitalism? They said, if we could deal with the onslaught of communism, we can deal with the onslaught of capitalism. And I think that's our position on one level. On the other level, we can see that there's a possibility for contrast to bring unity. I'm using Bob's words here. And the possibility for analogy to bring unity. I have used the analogy, and Bob does too, of a suit, which is grey, and then with that grey suit, for unity you can wear a grey tie. Bit boring, but you can do that. For unity you can also wear a red tie, and that will give you contrast, but nevertheless you can get unity that way. And then you might really want to wear a grey tie with red polka dots. Well, wear the grey tie with red polka dots. But you know what happens? Everyone hates us. The classicists say we're not classicist, and the modernists say we're not modernist. Now, as for Richard Rogers, very luckily I don't know that scheme. But you see, I would be asking him, did you think about context, and what is the argument you have to make? If you just decided to ignore it, then the hell with you. Prince Charles would be right. But if you have a way of using context and relating to context and remembering that it's a pulsating context, just the way your building is, that mediates the two but allowing for contrast between them, I would like to hear about it. If the building is so large that it overwhelms everything, you might want to talk about whether the brief is right for the site. If the brief is right for the site, well, this has happened in history before. Do you think that every Renaissance palace was built on a parking lot? It wasn't. It was built by removing a Gothic building. So history must change, and these, I think, are really situationist issues. Have to go into the pros and cons of that particular site at that particular time.
It's a question for Mr. Venturi, or Robert Venturi.
You know, Stephen is very formal, but this is going to be Bob and Denise. It's
Mr.
just
Bob.
simpler.
In the lecture you gave yesterday, you talked about slapping text onto the side of a building as sort of a form of language, and then in the discussion about the National Gallery, we're talking again about language and sort of a context. But in your lecture yesterday, you were talking about the Sydney Opera. Sorry, not the Sydney Opera House. The Santiago Calatrava's Opera House, I think, in Portugal. And you sort of negated the validity of that building because it didn't speak to you sort of in an overt form of language. And I was wondering, how is it that you actually draw the distinction between sort of the language in buildings, like semiotics and symbolism, and why one is more sort of pertinent to our age than maybe the other one?
I don't know the Calatrava. I don't know the Calatrava. Did
Well,
I ever
it was
mention
one of those ones.
I think it was one of those
it's
expressionist.
one of the ones that you showed. One that looked like a kind of a green duck. Was that it?
Yeah.
Oh, that, yes, I know. So, what was the question then?
Well, why is that not sort of a language through which speaks to the people or right for the time now?
Oh my God, how do you answer that?
Well, not all language is good. Some languages four-letter words, which belong in some places and not others.
I just think it's not related to our time. Our time is not a time when we are turned on by abstract geometry. I think also we're not turned on by what we were turned on by 50 years ago, which was industrial. I said this. I think industrial vocabulary factories were fabulous to discover the beauty and the relevance of industrial factories in the mid-century of the 20th century. It was very relevant, very stimulating. But now, that's not the thing. We are now into electronic expression. We're now into patterns. We're now not into form, but in pattern. And we're turned on by information giving. And it's what I just think, why is that so? I don't know why that's so, but it is the electronic age, it is the the information. That's what some other people have said. I agree with them. So I think it is our time for that. So it's our time where, as it was in the Middle Ages, where you were turned on by patterns on the walls of cathedrals, which gave out information. And other periods, Byzantine and so forth, where the information, the patterns, the decoration, which was also information very often, that was relevant then, and I think that is relevant now. So I think that abstract stuff made a lot of sense decades ago, but is not now. Why that's so, I don't know. Because we are interested in information. We have an enormous amount of complex information flowing every day in different ways.
Can other people hear? You
Oh,
need
good.
to
You
use
couldn't hear it. You're lucky.
No, we're going to, on this side of the room.
I'm sorry. I should have.
A group of
remembered
students have given us some images, and before we put some of those up in a few minutes, the deal was that the students would come this morning with a question or two that they could ask our visitors as part of that. So if I can turn to some of you, the payback now, you got to ask a question, be the critic for a moment instead of a student presenting your project, and some of you, please. Someone question? Here.
I have a question on your take of context. You said when you were talking about Richard Rogers, did you consider the context, and if not, to hell with you. My question is, what exactly is considering the context? What if a person were to say, my consideration of the context is that actually in this moment I need to ignore the context, or I need to import something which violently contradicts the context? What if taking consideration of the context doesn't mean looking necessarily at what is, as you were talking about yesterday, but what if considering the context means saying, this is the context and I think it ought to be something different?
Well, Zaha Hadid said, for an architect, context is a white sheet of paper. Well, that's a blanket statement, which I think is ridiculous. But there can be
Supremely
times, you're
ridiculous.
right, where context needs to change, and where you can predict that context will change. And that's why we do get these jumps in urbanism. So I come back to saying it's very much a question of a rational analysis of the situation. It's a situationist thing. It can't be decided by rules a priori, and certainly not blanket rules for the whole place. But as for neo-modernism, I've said POMO is the specious side of postmodernism. Well, I think neo-mo is pretty specious, and it's POMO using nice modernism, but using it in the wrong way. They're not interested in function, they're not interested in scale, they're interested in swoop this way, swoop that way, swoop the other way. And that, for the building that we did for Michigan, the student teaching facility in the sciences, they had hired a neo-mo architect for it. And he produced swoop this way, swoop that way, anything other than follow the directives about allowing for a movement system right by the building with a little bit of shelter for them because of their big spaces. We'd asked for things like that, but he ignored all of that. But he also couldn't come within $5 million of the budget. And after 5 months of trying, they fired him.